I met a guy named Alan Villaverde. Remember that name, Alan Villaverde. And Alan and I really hit it off well, and so I decided to take the job, even though I was having fun with Hyatt and the Caymans and everything else. But this project in Baltimore, it was going to be the biggest hotel opening Stofers had ever had, and so I was excited and moved to Baltimore. And I, how about them O's? There's no Oreo fans here, huh? Anyway, that's good. I'm not either. So we opened the Stouffer Harbor Place in Baltimore, and then I went to St. Louis and became general manager of the Stouffer in St. Louis. And then from there I went to LA and was general manager of the Stouffer in LA. And right about then, Stouffer Hotels was sold to a Chinese gentleman, Dr. Henry Chang, who owned Renaissance Hotels at the time and Ramada. It was Ramada and Renaissance Hotels. And so Stouffer all of a sudden became part of that company, and it really kind of changed what Stouffer was all about. Eventually, as you all probably know, then Marriott got involved and bought 50% of the deal, and Marriott and Henry Chang became partners, and now Renaissance is part of Marriott. Does Ramada even exist?
Yeah, they're one of the that outfit out of Jersey.
So Ramada's still around.
Because it has Days Inn and Wingate and
Well, there's how much
Super
I know.
8 and that kind of stuff.
I can't remember the last time I saw a Ramada.
But they're around.
Yeah. So anyway, I got offered a job by a gentleman who had been the previous president of Rock Resorts. Now remember I said I grew up in the islands, on the island of Virgin Gorda. So my father, during his career in the Air Force, became friends with a gentleman called Lawrence Rockefeller. And the two of them got together and started a company called Rock Resorts. And the first hotel that opened was a hotel in Puerto Rico called Dorado Beach. So I lived there as a kid, and then from there they went to St. John and they opened a hotel called Keneal Bay. And then from there they went to Virgin Gorda and opened a hotel called Little Dix Bay. And then from there they went to St. Croix and opened a hotel in St. Croix called Carambola. And they were all part of Rock Resorts. Kind of a sub-part of Rock Resorts was in Jackson Hole. There was the Jackson Lake Lodge, but it was part of a different foundation from an ownership standpoint, but was still over the Rock Resorts umbrella. There was also something in Virginia, what's...
Greenbrier?
Not the Greenbrier.
Homestead?
No, what's the I'm drawing a blank here. Well, in Woodstock, Vermont, the Woodstock Inn was part of it, but I can't think of what the name of it is. Where,
Washington Inn?
No, it's where they have the village that's still back in the 1800s.
Williamsburg.
Williamsburg, the Williamsburg Inn. Thank you.
No charge.
So all of that was part of Rock Resorts. Rock Resorts eventually was sold. I think SXX or somebody bought it, and I don't know where Rock Resorts is now. I think it's kind of went away, and somebody else has restarted Rock Resorts. But most of those nice hotels that I mentioned to you now are part of Rosewood Hotels, which is a really nice company. Where was I? I joined a company from LA. I joined a company in Oklahoma City called Medallion Hotels, and the president was Fred Ite, who had been the president of Rock Resorts. And so he knew my parents, and that's hence how I kind of got that connection. I worked for Medallion Hotels in Oklahoma City, and the hotel that I was in became a Westin. And hence then I joined Westin and ended up going to Houston, and I managed the Westin Galleria in Oaks in Houston, which was a 900-room property. It was really basically two hotels. two 450-room hotels separated by the Galleria. It was, at that time, it was the largest EBITDA hotel for Westin, producing hotel for Westin. They produced the highest amount of EBITDA in the company. And then from there I went and I opened the Westin Riverwalk in San Antonio. Yeah.
Tell these folks what EBITDA stands for, please.
Earnings before interest and taxes, is that right?
So it was a big earner.
It was a big earner, big money. I think that hotel did probably about, back then, probably about $35 million in EBITDA. It was a money maker. That was back in the oil days of Houston, and that hotel probably did about $75–80 million in revenue. So it was it was really two hotels, but they had been combined. So we had one executive committee, one management team, and everything else. Then I opened La Cantera in North Texas, or helped open it. And then from Texas, where did I go after Texas?
Mexico.
I went to Mexico. I became a regional director. He knows my life better than I do. From Texas, I went to Mexico. I became a regional director for Posadas, Fiesta Americana hotels. And I had the most, do you know Mexico very well? No? You? So I had the most horrible region. So there were 7 regions. I had 14 hotels. And I had the worst region of the company. My region was Veracruz, Jalapa, Mérida, Cancun, Cozumel, Iztapa, Acapulco. Any of those places ring a bell to any of you? They're all the top resort destinations in the country. Everybody else had all the other junk that was left over. So I had 14 of the highest EBITDA producing hotels. The highest being Coral Beach, which was at that time the only 5-star, 5-diamond by US standards hotel in Mexico at that time. Now there's a bunch of them, but at that time, the Coral Beach in Mexico was, in Cancun was the only 5-star, 5-diamond. Then September 11th happened and the world changed, and my region, hotel occupancies ran somewhere between 85 and 90% occupancy prior to September 11th. After September 11th, all of them went down to the 14–15% occupancy levels and went from $400 and $500 average rates to $89–90 average room rates. The market in Mexico just plummeted because obviously no one in the US was traveling. And they decided they were going to combine the regions from 7 regions to 2. That meant that my region would become, instead of 14 hotels, about 30 hotels, and I would have to move to Mexico City because I was one of the ones that were keeping. Back then, I'm divorced now, but back then I had a blonde hair, blue-eyed wife and a son. And the last thing I wanted to do was live in Mexico City with them because they would really have to travel with bodyguards and everything else, whereas in the rest of Mexico, it's extremely safe. But in Mexico City, they would have had security. So, yes?
Is it pretty in Mexico City?
It's beautiful. It's a beautiful, beautiful city. A lot of history. There's a lot of ruins there. Some of the best museums in the world are in Mexico City. Great place to live. I actually love Mexico City. What else? So then, so I decided I was going to move back to the U.S. And I had 3 offers at the time. One was to go to San Antonio as the Kevin Kane. Does anybody know who Kevin Kane is? Nobody knows who Kevin Kane is. Kevin Kane's the CEO of the Convention and Visitors Bureau here in Memphis. And so I was offered that same position, but in San Antonio, Texas. I was offered a job as a general manager of a hotel in LA. And then I was offered the job here in Memphis with Peabody. Well, I had met Marty Bells earlier. He was at a funeral, a mutual funeral of a friend. You remember the name Alan Villaverde? Mentioned that earlier. I said, remember that name? Alan Villaverde at that time was president of Peabody Hotels. And Marty went to his son's funeral, and I was good friends with Alan because remember, I worked with him many years before. And so I was at the funeral, and Marty Bells and I sat next to each other in the funeral. God bless you. And that night at dinner, Marty and I sat next to each other again, became friends. And when Marty heard that I might be leaving Mexico, he said, why don't you come to Memphis? And I said, well, honestly, I don't think that you can afford me. And he said, well, let us figure that out. And so I came, Marty and I hit it off, and they made me an offer I couldn't refuse. I joined the company, and here I am 17 years later. Since then, Alan has retired. I became president, and here we are today. That's it.
Class
So when, in the last 5 years or so, 6 years, the Bells family decided they were going to sell off all of their franchise properties. They owned Holiday Inns. At one time, they were the largest Holiday Inn franchisee in the world, partnered with Kemmons Wilson. So they sold off all of their Holiday Inns, Hamptons, Hiltons, everything else, and they were down to